Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Imperial Diecast. In today's video, I want to show you the only Mercedes-Benz SLR Mclaren with opening parts that is available to collectors of scale 1/24. And that is the one by Motormax. When I started collecting diecast cars back in late 2015, the Mercedes-Benz SLR Mclaren was, I think, the fourth or fifth car that I bought, because this is and still remains my favorite Mercedes-Benz sports car. And the interesting thing about this car is that it's actually not really a pure Mercedes-Benz, because here we have a Grand Tourer which was jointly developed by Mercedes-Benz and McLaren. It was built in the UK and sold from 2003 to 2010. When the car was developed, Mercedes-Benz owned 40% of McLaren, and the car was produced in conjunction between the two companies. So this car is evidence of what happens when Germans and Brits work together to create something so much better. It's a bit like having the two honor roll students in a class suddenly assigned on the same project. You know they're going to beat everybody else. Now, SLR is an abbreviation for Sport Light Racing. And with a price tag of close to $500,000, the SLR was a very expensive sports car back in the day, making Lamborghini's flagship Murcielago look like a bargain. This was probably one of the reasons why the SLR was succeeded by the SLS in 2010, which is slower, but at the same time had the price tag slashed in half. And take a moment to appreciate the timeless design of the SLR Mclaren. This is a car that was built in the 2000s, which is last decade, but it still looks like it could be a car from the 2020s. I mean, it does not look like anything else from the early 2000s. So looking at the front of the car, you can see the huge Mercedes-Benz star in the middle. You got a one slat front grille, and you got air intakes underneath, and of course you got these headlights over here. Now, this is probably the weakest part of the car, because the headlights, they don't have much detail, and they do have a peg in the middle, and especially these gaps right here is where the hood closes around them, and I think that Motormax could have done this a lot better. I mean, I know that Welly, for example, does things very well in this regard. We got here fog lights, although it's just an indication that they're there. They're not actual lights. And here we have very poorly hinted at turn signals. Again, this is obviously just Motormax quality, but would have been nice if at least we had some paint going on here. Looking at the rest of the hood, though, you can see that we have here these vents, and I think they contrast the rest of the hood pretty well. And we also have all these crease lines on the hood, which look very impressive as well. Now, one thing that I don't like about Motormax in general is that when they make windshields, you can see that the windshields have a slightly blue tint and appear slightly milky, and no amount of polishing will make this go away. I don't know why Motormax does this, because Maisto, Burago, Welly, and all the other brands do not do this. So I guess we'll just have to get used to it. Another thing that I don't like about the front of the vehicle is that if you look at the interior, the frame or the chassis of the cockpit at the top is poorly cut. Like, specifically, I'm talking about this part right here and this part right here. If they had painted this, and maybe this as well, black, then it wouldn't have been visible like this, you know? And it's very hard to do even if you take the car apart, so that's why I didn't do it. But it is not very visible in normal light conditions, so there's that. What I do like, however, are these vents on the dashboard. This little extra bit of detail here. That's pretty nice. Now, one of my favorite things about the Mercedes-Benz SLR Mclaren is the way its hood opens. So let's pop the hood. And this is where you will realize just how much detail Motormax put into the hood of this car, because this engine is really impressive. I mean, you would not expect this from a 124 scale Motormax, but there you go. Not only is the engine painted, I mean, you got these red stripes here, but we also have the SLR on the engine blocks themselves. We got a lot of cabling here. Of course, it's part of the same plastic mold, but they're still there. And so overall, I have to say that I'm quite impressed with the level of detail on offer here. This is basically a 5.4-liter supercharged V8, producing 617 horsepower at 6,500 RPM, and capable of a top speed of 334 km per hour, and going from 0 to 100 km per hour in 3.8 seconds. And this is what makes the SLR Mclaren such an amazing car, because these figures cannot be met by its successor, the SLS AMG, and its successor, the AMG GT, is even slower than the SLS AMG. So both of those successors are worse in terms of performance than this beast right here, the SLR Mclaren. Let's move on to the rest of the car. And now moving on to the car's side profile, let's take a moment to appreciate the elegant and aerodynamic design of this car. It just looks so timelessly futuristic, doesn't it? Now, I'll admit that I did do some modifications to this car, and one of the things that I did, if you look at these fender vents over here, you can see that I have basically taken a black marker and just painted in the vents so that it looks a lot more realistic, because when you buy this car, none of this is painted. On a similar note, I have also painted the side exhausts. That way they look a lot more realistic as well. You can see the McLaren badge above the fender vents. And now if we take a closer look at the rims, now Motormax did try to put some brake discs behind the rims as well as some brake calipers, although the caliper moves along with the disc, which it is not supposed to, and they also don't have much detail. You can see that Motormax did try to replicate the unique rims of the SLR Mclaren, including designing some lug nuts in the middle. However, the biggest thing that's missing here are the Mercedes-Benz stars in the center of the rims. This is the kind of detail that you would have gotten with a Welly, but unfortunately do not get with a Motormax. And here's a look at the back of the car, which I actually like more than the front, because Motormax did make this look quite realistic. First of all, we have a real European license plate. This is from Germany. I assume the M stands for Munich, or in this case, perhaps also Mercedes. We got the SLR logo over here, Mercedes star in the middle, and down here we actually have real lights. These are not painted on, these are actual lights, and they don't have any pegs in them, which is also very nice. And now moving on to these tail lights. I have to say that on one hand, this DRL strip in the middle is just painted onto the taillight, but it is done in a way that it does look nice. I mean, it does look quite detailed. The taillights do have a peg in the middle, but it's not particularly visible, so overall I think that these taillights look very nice. And as the exhausts were on the side of the car, you will not find any on the back. And here's my other favorite part of the SLR Mclaren. Its butterfly doors. Now these doors are not called gullwing doors because that would be the way the doors would open on the SLS AMG. On the SLR Mclaren, they open diagonally and forwards, which is why they're called butterfly doors. This is the same type of mechanism on the doors of the McLaren F1. So you know where the engineers of the McLaren got the idea from. And now let's move on to the car's interior. Now what I like about this car's interior is that, unlike something you would expect from a 124 scale Motormax, the entire interior is not kept in black. Instead, it's actually painted quite well. We got a red dashboard. We got a silver center console. We got raised buttons, and especially the vents are particularly good looking for this scale. And in the middle you can see the 5-speed transmission. And now let's move on to the driver's side of the car. On the driver's side, you can see that the steering wheel does have the Mercedes-Benz logo. And behind it, you can see that we have the instrument panel with the speedometer and rev meter, although they're not easily visible. They're still there. And that's about it. And here's a quick look at the bottom of the car. You can see that it says Mercedes-Benz SLR Mclaren, scale 124 by Motormax. Not much in terms of detail, but we do have the rear diffuser over here, and I'd say it looks pretty alright. Got some nice tread on the tires as well. And that's about it. Alright guys, I do hope you like this review of the 124 scale Mercedes-Benz SLR Mclaren by Motormax. And while I did wish that Welly made this instead of Motormax, I have to say that it's not as bad as I first thought. So if you're a collector of 124 scale model cars and you do not want to build one yourself using a Fujimi or Aoshima kit and paint it yourself and all that, and if you want to have a SLR Mclaren with opening parts, then this is the car to get. I'll see you in the next video. This is Imperial Diecast, signing out.